Oh yeah,
What kept you going through, like when times were tough? What kept you going?
Stories. I wanted to hear people's stories.
Yes.
Here's the thing. I've always said that podcasting is the cheapest therapy I've ever had.
Yes.
To be able to sit and talk to other people about their stories, about their backgrounds, and even if it's in the Focused on Forward is it's an interview, and I use the air quotes. It's an interview, but it's more of somebody sitting down telling their story, and I just jump in with random questions from time to time to kind of direct the conversation, so to speak. Okay. Funny Science Fiction and Pop Culture Addicts are true interview style shows, but even at that, we're asking people about their story, because as much as I'm glad to have people on the show, our very first interview for Pop Culture Addicts was with Carol Baskin from Tiger King. And okay, so we all know some of her story and what's going on there and everything. Yeah. But I was interested in the story behind the story. Okay, so there's, that's the Mike Rowe influence on my shows, is that I love the story behind the story. Yeah, everybody knows the claims that the methed out Tiger Boy made, and everything else that Joe Exotic did. But there was a story there about her and what she had gone through and how that show affected her and her family's life moving forward and everything else. So I was, I wanted to hear about that. I wanted to talk about that. And so her story is what drives the interview. And, same thing on Funny Science Fiction. We're glad to have people in who are, from these sci-fi movies and superhero shows and all this different stuff. And we're thrilled to talk with them and these voice actors. But I also want to know what their influences are. How did they what made them tick? What got them into, whatever it is that they're doing, whatever the reason why we have them on the show, what, kind of sparked that interest for them. So even in the crappiest of times, when I was still trying to figure out which way my head was screwed on after we got home from the hospital and I got started in this, it was people's stories, having an opportunity to share in somebody else's story and see their perspective on life is what keeps me going on all of it.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. Personal therapy. And Tim, I got an acronym for what podcast stands for. Would you like to hear the acronym?
Absolutely.
So everyone at home, you've heard this before. Let's say it with me now. A podcast is a personally oriented discussion centered around select topics. That is what that is what a podcast is, and the P stands for personal. That's the most important thing. That a podcast is personal to the host, it's personal to the guest, it's personal to the listener. A podcast is a very personal experience, and it's very therapeutic. So how is it therapeutic to you? Because for me, it's just like I feel like I can do anything when I'm on the mic. I just have this unknown confidence that I can't channel anywhere outside of a podcast. But like when I'm on a podcast, it's just confidence. And I do a fourth podcast called The Comfort Zone, which is just a solo show, which is super uncomfortable for me to do, which is the exact reason why I do it. And I just talk about myself or the company or what's going on in my head. It's very therapeutic. So what about podcasting is therapeutic for you?
Well, it originally goes back to, a lot of what I do goes back to Focused on Forward. And it started with that because in the therapy sense, because I would hear people talk about, and it's an audio only show. When we would record over Zoom and things. Yep. But I would leave the picture up because I find it easier to talk to a face instead of just a blank screen. Mm-hmm. At least I can see the person. I can see their emotions, their reactions to different questions and things like that. But during Focused on Forward, I take a lot of notes on what they've gone through, how they've overcome whatever it is they've overcome in life, the ways that they do it. And I'm not going to lie, those notes, I review them later and I'm like, oh yeah, that was a good point. I'm going to use that again. There are things that from other people's stories that I have taken and used in my own life and for my own wellness, my own mental being. And some of those things are amazingly powerful and poignant. And so these guys that come on the show, they have these great stories and they've done these or been through these sometimes amazingly horrific things.
Yeah.
And they come out on the other side just amazingly strong, and they have these details in their life and how they're doing it. And so when you see people go through that, sometimes your immediate response is, well, if that worked for them and they went through that, maybe I can try that. Maybe that will work for me. And so that's kind of what where it worked for me.